All right, we're ready to start. Well, welcome everybody. My name's Brian Ventura, and I'm with SANS officially here. I teach a number of their courses around the United States and in Canada. I have a CISSP certification preparation course coming to Sacramento. So those of you that are in Sacramento, if you know anybody that needs some training, that is, I believe, the second week in November. And the link at the bottom of the screen is my course list. And so if you are interested in finding out about that course, you can go to my site there. That's SANS site, and then look for the Sacramento class. Anybody need or CISSP or questions about CISSP? No? Okay, good. I also work for the city of Portland, and that's my day job. I do SANS about 10 times a year. I teach for SANS, but most of the time I'm with the city of Portland. And at the city of Portland, I'm in the IT area, so I take care of the enterprise level IT, but I negotiate and work with our different SCADA environments. And I think we have 3 different SCADA environments that I work with. So I know a little bit about it, but I'm primarily an IT side of the house. Some of my information there, if you're curious. I've been with the city for about 6 years. I've been in IT about 22 years. So some good experience, I think, at least. But today we're going to talk about incident handling, and this is material that comes basically from the 504 class for SANS, and this information kind of gives you an outline of what we should be doing for incident response and how we can prepare for it so that we're not surprised when it happens. So, fun little slide. A lot of times when we have incidents, we kind of feel like we just fell or something because it's high stress and something that we weren't prepared for. And this material is designed to get us prepared for it so that we don't have that surprise, so that we're not, we feel like we have a plan, we're following the plan, and we know what to do next. So what is incident handling? Incident handling is really just the idea that we have a process and a plan and communications written down, what we're going to do in the event that someone comes to us and says something bad happened. We think there's an intruder, we think we lost data, we think there's malware on a system. Any of those things can become an incident, and so what we're looking for is what can we do about that. And this kind of is based on, I don't know if you've heard of the OODA loop, but that's observe, orient, decide, and act. And that's what we want to be doing during our incident. So before our incident now, we can prepare our plan, but then when we get into the incident, we look around, we see what's happening, we check our devices and our tools to determine how bad the incident is before we actually make a decision, and then we act on that decision. So I think incident handling is going to be pretty important in general, but specifically there's legal requirements to respond in a reasonable amount of time. So NERC-CIP, is that something that you guys deal with? That's going to be on the SCADA side. That would be a compliance regime that you might have to deal with. They're going to want you to do incident response. State of California has personally identifiable information requirements to notify people if you lose their data. So Equifax, that happened a couple weeks ago, they're needing to send letters to all of the citizens of California. If we had an incident, we would have to do that as well for the people that might be impacted by the loss of their data. So there's lots of different reasons why we would do it, for compliance reasons or legal reasons, but there's also this due care concept that we can be sued at any time for anything we do, and if we're practicing due care, then we are likely to win that lawsuit if we say, hey, we did everything we were supposed to do, and the incident happened, and we handled it as best we could, then we have less liability in the end. So that's the goal of having a program. And then we want to write that into policy as we go on in our own organization. So some terms: an event versus an incident. The event is something that happens, and it can be anything. It's something you see, and someone tells you about it. So if someone sends an email to the help desk that says, "I got a phishing email," that's an event. If someone says my system is acting funny, it's running slow, that's an event. Is it an incident? We don't know yet. So it's something that's happened, we've noticed, and we want to investigate it to find out how severe is this problem. So that brings us to an event, to an incident, and our incident is an adverse event that we determine that we need to do something about to remediate. And there's usually a security implication or harm having happened to our infrastructure or our network. So some examples. The system crashes, we have some log entries in the boot, we have network spikes. Those things are just events. The unauthorized use of others' computers or sniffing traffic, those things are events that turned into incidents because we believe that they're just the tip of the iceberg, or they're actually something that's going to cause harm to us. Yes?
Do you need to record the events?
I would argue that if you feel that you don't have a robust incident response plan, then it's a good idea to process all events as incidents and then dismiss them. So you get to the point where you say, you know what, that system crash, we know it's because of bad memory and it's not an attack on our system, so we're going to open an incident before we know that and then close the incident with the outcome of this was not an incident. And that gives you practice with this. How many people have gone through incidents in their organizations? One, few, okay, about half, more than. And how many of those took more than, let's say, 2 months to resolve? So a few of you have some of those bigger ones that took a little bit longer, but most of these might be smaller incidents. And that's interesting and good to know. With the city of Portland, we've had a number of incidents. I've been on the security team for about 4 years, and during that time, we didn't have robust incident response at the beginning, and then it was part of my tasks to bring on an incident response with the rest of my team, and we designed a really robust incident response plan. One of the things that we did was we said, hey, every event that's even remotely related to security, let's call that an incident. So all the malware events that happen on the system, they get auto-cleaned by our malware software. We're going to call it an incident and work that a little bit. And how many people, ransomware is a big thing. You've been hit by it, or you know someone who's been hit by it. The city of Portland, we've done we try to stay trendy, so we've had a lot of ransomware events last year, but those are kind of passé now. So now we're getting a lot of phishing events, or incidents. So we shifted from that ransomware to phishing because that seems more relevant to today. 2018, we'll probably do something different. But seriously, when I teach, I would always talk about ransomware. I teach the critical security controls a lot, and one of the controls is to have a backup, and we'll talk about that in here. And I used to talk about the backups and say, oh, we've had a lot of ransomware events, and they usually happen while I'm gone, and our backup saves us or gets us through the incident, and that's how we resolve it. And then we had one while I was teaching where it took us 2 weeks to restore that data because it was such a large file system that our backup system corrupted and crashed and had all kinds of problems, and we had to bring the vendor in. So that was always fun. But I'm going to talk about a specific ransomware event that we had, an incident that we had that we worked through because there was some surprises that we had as we went through that. Question? Mm-hmm.
Is there a time frame for the event recording? In other words, we keep it for a year, and we classify it as low, does it become an incident, we just put it in an archive?
That's up to you and your compliance regimes and what requirements you have. I have a compliance regime that PCI where I have to keep everything for a year, so I would keep them for a year. I have another compliance that I work with the IRS safeguards. Anybody Pub 1075? no big deal. It's the IRS information, and they require us to keep it for 7 years. So if I call an event an incident, I need to store that for 7 years. So it depends on your compliance, but I would say that in general, a year is a reasonable amount of time, especially for those minor events. That's very sufficient. Anything.
The 1075, which is the IRS one.
That's the IRS one, yeah. So I'm saying if you don't have to have a compliance that says 7 years, I think some of the banking industries have that 7 year as well. But I would go by your compliance, and if not, maybe a year would be sufficient. So, yeah. So here's an example of some logs. So let's pretend that we're the technical person. We're looking at a system. The top one, we've got a snort output that says that there was an obvious signature. Does everybody know what an intrusion detection system is? So this is an intrusion detection system, snort. It's designed to look for bad packets or attacks on our system. So it is telling us that there was an attack that is specifically an IIS VTI info attack. And that is related to front page extensions and things. So this has come in on our snort. Our intrusion detection system has told us that someone has tried to attack us with IIS VTI inf, whatever that is. So we know that this is either an event or an incident because something bad is happening. Next, we look at the logs of our server. So we saw the IDS alert, and we went to our server to see what happened on the server, and we see that the server has a file does not exist comment in it, and it talks about user local Apache htdocs. So what do you think? Do you think we should call this an event or an incident? An event? Why an event? Why not an incident?
Because you have no idea whether there was an actual intrusion or anything actually happened.
Okay. Okay. There's actually an indicator in here that would tell you which way you would go with this data. So the snort output is telling us that there is an attack on IIS. IIS is a Microsoft product, so that's Windows. And then on the bottom side, our log output actually tells us that it's an Apache server, which is typically on Unix, but either way, it's not IIS. So it's not very likely that this attack would succeed. So this one would fall into event because of that. They're attacking Windows and they're actually touching a Unix box, so it's not a big deal. But these are the types of things that if we're not sure, let's call them incidents to start, use our process, get good at our process, and then come back and say, next time, a year from now when we're really good with our process, we're going to just call this an event and not document it at all. We're just going to kind of ignore it because we recognize it's not attacking something that we actually have in our environment. So it's a kind of a grayscale between them, and it could go either way, but there are distinct reasons why we would call them one or the other. So in incident response, we're going to have these steps, and these are the steps that SANS uses and NIST uses, but some of our compliance regimes may not show these exact names. The CISSP certification that I teach doesn't use these names. Why? I don't know, but I have to teach two different things. But as long as we understand that, we want to. These are not things that we have to do exactly these words, but we are going to be in these phases as we go through our incidents. So most of our time is spent in identification. But before we do identification, we've got to prepare for it. So by the way, I believe you have access to all of these slides. So I believe you're getting them at the end. So you're welcome to take pictures. I'm not trying to, especially if you have me in them, because I'm vain. I don't know. I'm kidding. But if you want to take pictures, that's great because it'll be a quicker way to get this. But you will have these slides at your disposal. And in the slides, there actually is more information that hopefully I'm conveying in my talking about it that's not on the slide. But these are the phases. Identification is we're gonna spend a lot of time because that is, we don't know that we have an incident right now. We're looking for it. So that's the idea of that identification. But before we do that, we need to do preparation, be ready for an incident. So we need to write our plan. We need to decide who's on the team, things like that. So let's talk about that. So in our preparation, our goal is to make sure that when an incident happens, we're not running around and high stress and not knowing what to do and skipping steps and missing things. We are ready. We have our call to the incident response team. They say, we've got it. They know who to talk to. They bring in their tools, their bag, and they do their work. They know how to communicate. They know who to communicate with. And they go through the process. So that's the goal of this preparation phase, and there's a lot of steps involved in this. One of the big ones for me is communication. So I'm standing in front of you talking, so apparently I'm able to do that, but I would argue that I'm not the person to talk to the press, because I would probably tell them too much. So, because I'm a technical person, I'm going to want to give them the technical details. Oh man, it was an IIS attack, and we found it in the snort log, and we saw it in the, and the press doesn't want, you don't want to tell them that kind of information. So we have a communication person that works for the city of Portland. She's not in IT, but she's my person to do the communication. So she's in my incident response plan. So my incident response plan says incident commander is my boss, and incident team is myself and my team members, and then communications is this other person that doesn't work in technology but works as a communications person, and then we may have other contacts that are inside of our plan for who we have to deal with for each of these areas. For my SCADA environments, I'm going to have my SCADA contacts who I'm technically contacting and who I'm contacting in the business to let them know that there's some problems and that they need to be a part of this incident. So getting those people is a big deal. So there's a couple different things that we would talk about with people. I talked about the people that are actually in the incident response, and we definitely want to make sure that they're ready for it, they're trained, they understand what incident response is, they have our plan, they know what our plan is, and they know how to go through the steps, they know who to communicate with. But we also need to train our end users. So before we started, I asked if anybody had done anything with SANS, and some of you said securing the human, and that's a program for end users specifically for your compliance regimes, and also just so that they have general user awareness. And it can be SANS, it can be another company, but you want to have your end users understand what kind of problems are happening. I think right now phishing is a big deal, so we've been doing a lot of phishing training, and we actually did phishing internally to see if we could catch any of our people. Good news, we caught a lot of them. But having those trainings is helpful, one, because hopefully they won't click on things. Hopefully they won't do inappropriate things because they understand why they shouldn't be doing it. But on the other side, they're our incident response firsthand people. They're going to find our incidents. They're the ones looking in the email and find the phishing email. They're the ones that picked up a USB in the parking lot and now and are about to plug it into their computer until they remember their training that says, don't plug that into your computer, take it to the security team. So we want all of our employees to go through some kind of training on security and then be ready to work with us and let us know when there's a potential incident. Question?
Do you have a particular user awareness training program?
Well, I'm standing here as SANS, so I'm going to have to say securing the human. But I did put in there that I work for the city of Portland and we don't use securing the human. So there's a lot of different vendors out there. I would determine what you want for training and then look at what the companies offer. So we use a company called MediaPro at the city of Portland. Not because they're the best company, but because when we were looking for 10 or 15 different things, and securing the human did not have as many of those things as MediaPro at the time, 3 years ago, and now they do. So, but it's cumbersome to switch. There's a lot of bureaucracy in these government entities, and so a lot of red tape, and so we just stick with what we have. But Securing the Human is a great program. The MediaPro program's pretty good. I've used, what's the Kevin Mitnick one? KnowBe4, yeah. So there's a number of companies. I would look at all of them, or not all of them, but pick 2 or 3 that are major brands and then see if they meet your requirements. We do video training that's a little bit interactive, so you answer questions and you click on things, but it's basically just talking to you. But maybe you want more than that, and that's where you might want a different program. We have our once-a-year program, we have our PCI specific program, and then we have videos that we do ad hoc where we just throw them up there and say, hey, if you want to, look at this cool video, it's fun. Some of them have games in them.
Is there like tiers of training? Because I've always, I think, things I take for granted would be like being able to find, like, for a hyperlink, the IP address of hyperlink. That's just, for me, easy to do. But then I think of like, my mom called me up the other day, oh, well, I got a call from Microsoft. They said I had to call them, I think
Yeah.
pay $95. And their second question is, do I have a Windows computer or an Apple?
Yeah. And there's definitely levels of training. Here I'm looking for that base training. What I'm talking about with SANS Securing the Human and other products is that base level of training, which is for your mother and for your employees. Just here is general things in the world today. And that Microsoft scam is something that isn't in my training, but maybe it should be. By the way, my son got hit by that, and I'm an information security professional. You'd think that I would have taught him these things, so bad me. So yeah, there are different levels. Your developers should have development training on how to do development. SANS has courses for that. Your IT professionals should have training on how to securely implement their servers and their software products, and then your security team should understand information security. So there are definitely levels. Yes?
So is part of your targeted testing for spear phishing and everything like that, is that part of your media pro package? Or is that
No, we did that separately. So we're all government entities, so MSISAC, you guys have used MSISAC. We used them to perform the phishing because they're inexpensive, they're something that's provided. They have a booth out there, I haven't seen them yet today, but they should be here. So the MSISAC was a great resource for us. DHS is gonna come in and do another one, and they do a 6-week program where they do like a low level, this is phishing, please don't click here, now click here. You know, and it's that level, and then they'll have the really sophisticated one where it seems like it's somebody that you know and you trust, and you get phished by them. So, and that the goal of their program is to tell you, hey, the low level, you got 0% hits, I wish. And then the high level, you got 10% hits, I wish it was that low. And then you know you're somewhere in between there as your level of what you need, so, yeah. Uh-huh.
So I also used GoFish.
Yeah.
GoFish is an open source framework.
Mhm.
You have to put a little bit of work into it, but you can actually target users, target groups, and just do a dump for from that directory and just shoot out targeted communication. So that's one. And two, I've used SANS to create a user on my previous job for creating users, create platform, different levels, so I can target executives, accountants, town council, things of that nature. My current job, I only have 150 employees, so different pricing structure, et cetera. So I use them before just because they have better pricing for cities and towns like that.
Yeah.
But SANS is a good platform. There's Wombat Security, there's Terra Nova. I did a whole priority meeting actually we can talk after. But
Yeah.
they're really based on knowledge, what the audience is, because you may want to have more gamification.
So let me continue on because no problem. It's good information, and I highly recommend you guys talk. But the training wasn't what we wanted to talk about only here. So moving on in our preparation, one of the things that we're going to want to do in an incident is we're going to need to collect information and monitor people's computers. Do you have authority to do that in your organization? Maybe. Depends. One of the ways that you can ensure that you have that, you talk to your legal department, make sure that you do have authorization to snoop on people, see what they're doing, collect information from their systems, but then you put these warning banners up. When you log into your computer, you see that warning banner, you click OK, and you never read it, that thing. It actually should have specific language in it. One of the things you obviously should say is, This is an authorized use only. If you're not a part of our organization, go away. And that is because there was a legal suit where someone broke into a computer. They tried to sue that person, put them in jail, and that person said, hey, it was on the internet. I didn't know I wasn't supposed to crack their passwords and log in, and they won the case. So now, if you say, go away, now you've done your legal bit to say, that attacker is obviously an attacker. Well, the same thing we need to do is in the middle there, it says the use of systems may be monitored and recorded. We need some kind of verbiage like that that says, we're watching you, we have authorization to watch you, we're going to read your email, we're going to look at your stuff if you're authorized to do so. So you need to first get your authorization to do these kinds of things, and then you need to write it out so that your users are aware of it. And that's one of the ways for doing it is within the warning banner. Does any of us work with the European Union at all? I don't think we do. Privacy laws are different outside of the United States, and so you have to take that into account, and that's why one of the reasons why you're talking to your legal team. There also may be different laws in California than in Oregon that you need to take into consideration that I don't know about. So, but make sure that you have that banner because that is going to let you know that, or let your users know that you are going to do this and then give you the authorization to be able to collect those forensics images or whatever information as we go through the process. So we need a policy. We need an overall policy that says this is what we're going to do for incidents. We need to understand how we're going to address these. One of the big questions is, do we do incident response internally? Do we have the staff? Or do we hire a company to do our incident response? So as an example, since Equifax is in the news, hopefully all of us have heard about that. If you had a breach of the level of what Equifax had in your organization, would you do that internally or would you hire a company like they did? And that's a question for you to answer for yourselves. But if you don't have staff for this, you need a company, and you better get that contract with them now because incident response is expensive. It's around $1,000 an hour. If you go and if you have an incident today and you call the company and you say, hey, I want Mandiant or whatever that big company is to come in and do this for me, they're going to say, well, we don't have any people right now, but for $3,000 an hour, and I'm making up numbers, we'll come on out and we'll pull all our resources and we'll take care of you. Versus if you set up a contract and then later have an incident, your contract will dictate they will respond in this much time and their price per hour is this much, which hopefully will save you a lot of money. If you do have staff at your location, that's fine also. The question that I then have is, what are those staff doing when they're not dealing with an incident? Are they just sitting there twiddling their thumbs? That's not very likely. So then if they're doing real work now, when the incident happens, are you really okay with having them not do any of their other work? Because that's what's going to be required to deal with the incident. So you need to make that decision for the city. We do have a company that we deal with. We also leverage MSISAC, and we have internal staff for the small things. So anything small, we're going to deal with. If it's bigger than a bread box, we're going to call our external company. We need to get management buy-in and sign-off. We need to definitely make sure that what we're doing is authorized and expected by the organization, so we definitely want that sign-off, and that would be part of that policy side of things. Next, something interesting that we don't think about, especially as computer geeks, but we need to take notes as we go through the incident. It's going to be very important so that we can, both for legal reasons, so that we, in a court case, we can bring these things up, but also so that we understand the flow and we can go back and find things as we get further into the incident. We may forget pieces and we can look back at them. The other thing that taking notes does is it slows us down, especially if we're writing them in paper. And we're recommending writing them in paper because, one, courts like paper. They don't understand computers because you bring in, a flash drive or a hard drive or a computer and you say, well, there's information on here and it's not very obvious that the information is there. They understand paper. So it's a good idea to have it in paper. But it also slows you down because I type fast, but I don't write fast. So it's going to make me do more of my process and take my time going through this. So one of the things I'll talk about later is when we determine that there's an incident, it's not likely that that incident started when we declared it. It probably started before that. And the example of Equifax, when did they get breached? Like 6 months ago or something, we're not sure, but it didn't happen the day that they said, by the way, we have an incident. It even took them 6 weeks from when they identified it to when they told us. And then it was probably 6 weeks to 6 months before that that they actually had the breach. There's no need to run as fast as you can now because they've had 6 months in your network or they've had 3 weeks in your network. Saving 5 minutes isn't going to save a lot, I would argue. So that's one of the reasons why we want to slow down.
Question on the notes.
Yeah.
Should you put a date,
Yes.
semi-concept to correlate with what your incident is?
Yes.
Or it's gonna be a document.
Yes, you definitely want to have dates and timestamps in your documentation that says, hey, on Thursday at 10 a.m., I came into the room, I was looking at things, this is what I found, here are some pictures that I took, and I keep that log, and then I say, okay, at noon I went somewhere else. Holy cow, am I behind? Identification phase, we're going to go through here, and yes.
So one quick question on the sorry.
Uh-huh.
But I've also been told that it's good to have some investigation.
Yes, the page numbers help to keep you in order so that you know how things go through, yes. So our identification phase, we're looking in our tools, we're looking in our SIMs, we're looking in our network devices to find bad things, and this is our kind of continuous period. We're just looking all the time and seeing what we find. A lot of things come in through the help desk or some of our tools. So some examples, we would be looking at our network perimeters, our host systems, our system level, our application level. We would look at all of these different areas for the potential of an incident. Here's an example where we're looking at what ports are listening on a network perimeter, and then we can look at, is this what we were expecting? Did we expect VNC to be on? Because I see VNC in there. That might be a surprise to us, and that's at the network perimeter. We might be looking on the host, and it brings these pop-ups, or we'd be looking at a log on the host, but this is a detection. Maybe, hopefully this would centralize, and you get this in a centralized location so that you can look at all the computers instead of a single one. Another example is here, Sophos is bringing things up and telling us that there's viruses. Hopefully this is also centralized. But then we also have our applications that have logs of their own, and we want to make sure that we're seeing that information when we look for our incidents. I talked about the human sensors while we were doing training, but we definitely want our people to be looking for these things because they're going to be our first line of defense. They're going to see things before we see it potentially. SANS does have a lot of documents. You should go out to our website here at the bottom, the resources downloads. There are intrusion detection cheat sheets that'll help you to find these things and know what you're looking for. Fun one, when do you declare that it's an incident? When do you implement incident response? Sometimes we're afraid of doing that, and we're saying it's better to declare the incident early than wait and then realize that it's bigger than what it was if you would have declared it a week ago or a day ago. So it's okay to declare these things, go through the process. You can always close an incident early without huge ramifications where the opposite of that may not be true. So as we go through this, we identified that we have an incident. We're going to move into containment, which is our next phase. Question?
On the last slide, you mentioned human error as ruling out a mistake about an incident. How does that fall in line with the definition that an incident is something that creates harm or causes harm?
Mm-hmm.
You know, something, a mistake an employee might make in a system causing an outage or downtime causes some harm to the organization, but is it not an incident then?
What we're looking for is if it's a false positive. So we see an event, and the event could be an incident, but we haven't decided that yet. And so sometimes there's some things that look bad, but then it turns out to not be as bad as it was. So we're saying, look at those before you declare an incident, but declare earlier than you might be comfortable doing.
So really containing the realm of an incident is something of an outside.
Not necessarily, but yes, a power outage could be an incident because you can't run, like you have to run. So that could be an incident that you go through this process, but it isn't malicious. So containment is a phase that we're doing that is not getting rid of the bad guys. What we are doing is stemming the bleeding. So this is your EMTs come out really quickly, and they may bandage somebody, they may put him on IV fluid, but they don't do heart surgery, they don't do brain surgery. So the containment is, if we know the data is leaving the office right now, can we slow that down? Can we stop it? One of the things we have to worry about here is we may be letting the adversary know that we know about them. So we have to be a little careful about this, but containment is mainly to ensure that this doesn't spread any further. So there's a couple phases inside of this, or sub-phases. We might do short-term containment where we pull a machine off the network. The system backup is taking a forensics image. We definitely want to do that. And then long-term containment is where we are containing the event because we can't eradicate it. We cannot get them off the network because it's too complex. And so we're going to allow the systems to run. So let's talk about those. Sorry. We want to actually deploy a team in there. Let me skip that one. We do want to inform management of it, but as we go through, we want to keep them informed of what we're doing. We want to keep track of what the incident is and make sure that they're allowed to make their decisions. Ultimately, an incident, decisions on what you should do with an incident, the business has to be a part of this. They may have requirements that they must continue to do business, and we're, as an information security professional, I am an advisor to the business. They own the risk. So if they say we're going to allow that malware to run, that's what I have to allow them to do.
Good question. So on the long-term containment, where you get the eradication, can you implement a shadow IT process for the long-term containment?
What do you mean by shadow IT?
In other words, I know that this is a problem, something's happening on the network, but I
Yeah.
can't pull it off.
Yep.
So the whole business issue. Can I do a shadow follow without the other guys knowing it? Because if they know,
Yeah.
they're gonna either cause major harm to me.
Yeah, they may implement their exit strategy of delete all the systems or something like that.
Document a shadow process and say, I'm watching all this, boom, so when it goes to court, even though it happened,
Yeah.
I've got documentation to support why they pulled off.
Yes, definitely. You're definitely going to not document why you're allowing it to run on the network and what mitigations you're doing along the way. You may put them on VLANs that don't have access to data, but they're still on those systems, something like that you're going to go through that process, yes. And that's what we're talking about here, is we want to make sure that we aren't looking in obvious ways that indicate to them. So maybe I'm looking at my log server, I'm not looking at the actual system that they've infiltrated and they're running on. I'm looking at the logs in my centralized location. They don't know that I'm looking at that, hopefully. So I talked about the short term, some of the examples: we might disconnect a machine from the network, pull the power cable. We want to take forensics images typically, and in our situation, we had an incident that was a ransomware incident. We took forensics images, we cleaned it up, we reinstalled the system, and we thought we were good. And we sent the images off to MSISAC, and it takes them a little while, but a few weeks later, they came back and said, okay, we determined what ransomware was on there. It was this ransomware, and we had already determined that. I did some of the forensics, so I knew that. And then they said, and there were 7 other malware things on the system, and that surprised us. And one of them was a keylogger, and that really surprised us. So we had an incident that we had closed out completely. We had fixed it, and then 2-3 weeks later, we found out that they have passwords to get into our network potentially because of this keystroke logger. So that was very surprising. And that's why we want to take those images and work with those. We got lucky. The user told us their password. And we have a policy in IT that says if we learn of your password, you must change your password. So we changed that person's password. We didn't change all the service accounts that run on the system, and that was a problem. And so we had a remediation after the fact where we went through that. So do want to notify the business unit. I talked about that. There's a possibility that we may need to coordinate with our ISP to block things. We want to create those forensics images. There's some tools to do that. You want to make sure that you have the media already for those kinds of things. I have some images for drive duplicators, but I don't think that that's necessary, right? You want to get those, but let me see. So let me skip to, since we're basically out of time. I apologize. They started us a little late, but so eradication is when we've determined the whole scope. So during the containment, we may have decided that our scope was this system and this system, but we don't want to do eradication until we know that all of the systems that are infected. So we want to get that whole scope and then say, okay, we're ready to do this. We're going to turn off all the systems. We're going to disconnect from the internet. We're going to re-image all these systems and then bring them back online. That's if it's a huge issue. For our ransomware, we just re-imaged that one machine. We restored from backup on the different file servers that were affected, and then we called it a day. But we did that eradication side. So we restored from backup. If you have to, you can remove the malicious software. I recommend re-imaging the systems because of my example where there were 6 other pieces of malware that I didn't know about. So but the fact that I re-imaged the system meant that I didn't have to worry about that there might have been additional malware. You always want to use your incident to increase your defenses. So you recognize that ransomware came in. What can we do to block that? Maybe we get a better mail filter that will stop those phishing emails or those attachments. Maybe we implement something on the file servers that looks for these encrypted files, which is what we did. But maybe we get different firewalls or something like that. You always want to do your vulnerability analysis, make sure that whatever attack they came in on, the Equifax, it was Apache Struts, see if you have that in other places in your organization, because just that one server, remediating it, they may attack some other server next. So you want to make sure that you learn what the attack vectors were and then check for them in other places in your organization. We talked about that. So you want to be responsible for when you do this, bringing it back online to make sure that you don't get hit right after that. Sony got hit with their PlayStation Network like 3 times. They said, we've totally cleared it up, let's bring it back online. And then they went down a week later or 2 days later. And that was because the business unit wanted to get this back up and running. We're not making money. People can't play their games. They're going to go to Xbox, whatever, but they were doing it too quickly. So you want to be really responsible about this, but ultimately the business unit wins. They get to do this. One of the big things that I want to talk about before we leave is we definitely want to do lessons learned, and we want to determine what we can do better next time. So it's both about the incident response process. We want to understand what we did well and what we didn't do well in the incident response process, and then also what process improvement we can do in our organization to stop ourselves from having the next incident. So we'll write a report, we'll document all the things, that'll have the timestamps in it. We'll make sure that we have our meeting as soon as practical after the event and bring in everybody who was involved in the event so that they can talk about things and give their perspective, and then apply any of the fixes that you get from those systems, or from that process of doing the lessons learned. So I apologize that I ran over. Any questions before we?
Go back 3 slides really quick.
3 slides, oh boy.
Yeah, right there.
All right. And again, you will get these slides, so. Well, if you don't, contact me. So I will give it to you.
Do you have to document your postmortem?
That's what the lessons learned postmortem, very similar, but that's what we're talking about here. You want to definitely have those that documentation of what we did in the incident and what are action items to do something better in the future.
That goes no case file, close it file.
It can be in your case. I agree that it should be in your case file, but it may also exist other places just as process improvement. Yes.
You said that you sent your logs to MSI. What does that look like exactly?
We actually took forensic images, and so we took a hard drive image of the whole system, and then we put that on a hard drive, and we mailed them the hard drive, and then they performed forensics on it.
So is that a service you pay for, you subscribe to it?
MSISAC, it is free as long as you're an MSISAC member. For other companies, for an actual company, you would actually pay money for that. And it's a lot of money. It's not cheap to do that kind of work. And that's why we were happy that they would do it. DHS has done it in the past as well, but I think that theirs is as a higher tier, it would be a bigger incident. So, yeah. Yes?
So you said you were seeing an increase in phishing attacks lately. We're seeing a lot of phishing, spear phishing attacks
Yeah.
happening. They seem to be pretty sophisticated and run by much more organized groups. Initially, they kind of look unrelated, but it just seems like a lot happens over the same period of time.
Mm-hmm.
What is your experience with that, and what kind of actions are you taking?
So we're monitoring it. We're doing a lot of outreach to our users just to say phishing is on the rise. Our help desk has a robust process where if they get more than X number of reports of the same phishing, they'll send a message to all employees saying, warning, this is out here. Here's a screenshot, not real. Please don't click on it. Do these things. And then if it actually has a higher level of maliciousness, like it has malware in it, we will rip those messages out of people's mailboxes, or we'll start remediating things. One of the things,
Specific spear phishing where you're getting invoice payment requests and routing numbers.
yeah, those aren't as big of a deal to me. The ones that I don't like are the ones that say IT wants you to do this thing. Like your password needs to be reset because IT is changing something. So that's our challenge. Yeah. Luckily, they're not using our term for IT. We don't call ourselves IT. I'm not telling you because you'll fish me. No, but we've actually had them use our logo, the city seal. We've had them do some really sophisticated things to make it look real. So educating the users is the best one so far, and then a robust mail filter. Yeah. Thank you for your time. I apologize for rushing. I'm welcome to answer more questions, but if you're going to another talk, then you have about 5 minutes to get to the next talk. Any questions? Thank you.